Welcome back from lunch, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed good food and great company. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our second panel for today, European Defense is Fast Forward Fast Enough. Dr. Una Alexandra Berdzina-Charenkova is graciously back for the second time in 2 weeks to support the Baltic Defense College. Thank you very much, Una. Una is the director of LIA, the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, and she is also the head of the China Studies Center at Riga Stradiņš University. Una is a China scholar and a discourse analyst, and she has held research fellowships at Fudan, Stanford, Oxford, Hokkaido University, and she's also affiliated with King's College London. And she is the author of Perfect and Balance, China and Russia, which was published in 2022. And she is the editor of Discourse, Rhetoric, and Shifting Political Behavior in China, which was published by Routledge in 2023. Una, welcome back, and the floor is yours.
Again, thank you, Louis. And it is my honor to introduce the speakers first, and then we dive into the presentations. Now, to my left, we have Lieutenant General Sir Ralph Wooddisse, CBEMC, who is the commander of Allied Rapid Reaction Corps. Wonderful to have you here. Your career started when you were commissioned into the Royal Anglian Regiment in 1992. It was a different time, I believe, after your degree at University College London. Now, you have had a 9-month tour to Kabul when you, as your first staff job, which of course was strong experience for you, you moved to the Army headquarters in 2018 as the Assistant Chief of the General Staff, where, among other things, you led the Army's response to COVID-19. Fascinating. And the Army's input into the 2021 Defense Review. Since 2021, you are Commander Field Army, a post that was dominated, of course, by the Army's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And you are commanding the Allied Rapid Corps since 2024. Welcome. It's wonderful to have you here. Next, we have Mr. Ed Arnold. Mr. Arnold is Senior Research Fellow for European Security with the International Security Department at RUSI. And the experience covers defense intelligence, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, both within the public and the private sector. Now, I believe your primary research focus is the transformation of European security following Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine, specifically the Euro-Atlantic security architecture, which of course is a difficult job to have today, and thank you for doing it. You joined RUSI from the private sector, which gives you you've seen it from both sides now. Your military career was primarily spent overseas, including deployments to Afghanistan and East Africa, and a posting at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe during the 2014 Ukraine crisis. Now, you hold an MA in War Studies from King's College, so we walk some of the same halls, which is wonderful, and a BA with honors in international politics from University of Stirling, Scotland. Welcome, Ed. Next, we have Ambassador Arkady who is a senior researcher and the head of the Russia program at the Institute for National Security Studies. Now, Professor Millman is a senior researcher and the head of the Russia program at the Institute for National Security Studies, and interestingly has served as the Israeli ambassador to Russia in the early 2000s and Israeli ambassador to Azerbaijan in the late 1990s. You began your career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a senior researcher of the Soviet Union, and later you had the chance to put that to work during your diplomatic career. And after you finished your diplomatic career, you have worked, among other positions, in the Israeli high-tech sector, a venture capital fund with partners that invested in startups. We know Israel is famous for the startups. And you've studied at Tel Aviv University and Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So wonderful to have you here and an excellent addition to the panel. And lastly, we have Major General Yvan Martin, Advisor on Influence and Information Warfare and Head of Strategic Anticipation and Orientations of the Joint Staff in Paris. Welcome. Major General Martin was born in Angers and has, in the late 1990s, served as an executive officer, including 2 deployments to Kosovo. Also missions with the UN in Ethiopia, Eritrea. From 2013 to 2015, deployed as head of the Desert Task Force West in Mali. You have also served as the defense attaché, so the diplomatic work is not unfamiliar to you, at the French Embassy in the Russian Federation in the late 2010s and in Ukraine, 2023 through 25. And now, as of last year, you are the advisor on influence and information warfare in Paris, officer of the Légion d'honneur and a commandeur of the Ordre National de Mérite. An excellent panel. Now, let me kick you off with a question to you, Sir Wooddisse. So, the big question that everyone's been asking, how has NATO reacted to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine? Can you take us more about also, and we've talked about the Hague Summit so much, right? What is your read? How do you see it, right? Are we exaggerating? Are we really giving the credit that's due to the Hague Summit to show NATO's resolve? And what I'm particularly interested in, given your experience, how do you see alliance adapting to the new fight? Bringing in AI, bringing in machine learning, all these domains that are 21st century, almost 22nd century wargaming. Over to you, please.
Great, thank you, Una, and thank you to the Baltic Defence College for inviting me here today. It's been an excellent morning, full of interesting perspectives, which I've certainly gained a lot from. I think the question as to whether Europe is moving fast enough is one that and I suspect many others in this room think about day in, day out. My role is at the sort of higher end of the tactical level in the Allied Rapid Reaction Corps. We're a multinational corps, but British-led, with sizable contingents from, amongst others, the United States. And it is interesting to reflect on the geopolitical conversation that we had this morning. My experience is that the United States remains firmly engaged on European security and is working tirelessly in order to be able to deliver the very best that NATO can offer. And I see that from SACEUR downwards, and certainly through the staff that I have within my headquarters. But these are profoundly challenging times, and you have, I think, a combination of a revolution in geopolitical affairs, if I can put it in those terms, and at the same time a revolution in military affairs, coming to your point around how technology is changing the way that we fight. And ordinarily you would hope that these things sort of come in series. You can deal with one and then the other, but in this instance they're coming in parallel, and we have to be able to contend with not only some shifting some assumptions around European security, but also a technological revolution that is transforming the way that we fight, and we need to be able to adapt to both of those two things. My headquarters is focused, and indeed my core is focused on realizing what SACEUR wants me to do, which is effectively to be able to respond to any eventuality within the NATO area. Realistically, that probably means that we have to be really adept at responding to threats in 2 or 3 geographic areas, one of which is the Baltic states. And therefore it's a particular honor and a privilege to be here today and to learn about the Baltic states and their perspective. It's an area I'm familiar with, but it is an important engagement nevertheless. In terms of what we're seeing from a technological perspective, clearly the operations that are being conducted in Ukraine, where we are learning a huge amount from, are changing the way that we perceive the way that the land power and indeed multi-domain operations should be prosecuted. The advent of artificial intelligence, large language modules, cloud computing, edge computing, and the networks that allow you to connect those things together is profoundly changing the way that we do our business, and I'll come back to what that means in a second. Robots and unmanned systems are making a huge difference to the way that Ukraine fights. fewer people, more machines are able to resist Russia in ways that were unimaginable from my perspective, at least even 5 years ago. So we're seeing some very profound changes in the way that these things are done. And we're also seeing the benefits of fusing multi-domain effects together, land, space, air, cyber, and special forces, and indeed the maritime component. And if you can do that effectively, then it allows you to be really strong and really, really powerful. And that's the business that I'm in at the core level, stitching these bits of technology together to the very best of our abilities, such that we can fight in a way that Russia in particular, I think, would find it very difficult to be able to resist. So it seems to me that that's the challenge that I face in this ever-changing geopolitical construct. And everything that I've seen of NATO over the last 2 years that I've been in this job tells me that if you can do those things, if you can harness technology in the way I've just described it, then you will absolutely provide the most powerful military alliance in the world today. And I've seen how NATO can work when these things are stitched together in the ways that I've just described them, and it is really, really impressive. The alliance turns from being a sort of slightly bureaucratic, and as Emmanuel Macron described it a few years ago, a brain-dead organization, into one that is the most profoundly powerful military alliance on the planet. And that's, I think, where we're moving. But we're probably not moving fast enough. We probably need to spend faster, we need to innovate faster, and we need to build faster than has been the case hitherto. And that's certainly the message that I'm taking back to my government. My Prime Minister absolutely understands that and said as much at the Munich Security Conference only a few weeks ago. But that is the challenge that we face as Europe starts to embrace the challenges that it faces with its North American allies in the months and years ahead.
Does this mean that we don't control the timeline, that time is not on our side?
I don't think that time is necessarily on our side. As George Robertson mentioned earlier on, NATO is a defensive alliance. We have no ambitions beyond the territorial borders of the alliance. That's not necessarily the case for Russia. And in that sense, Russia owns the timeline, and we need to be able to respond to that timeline whenever it's manifest.
Thank you. And Mr. Arnold, we just heard that there's a parallel revolution. Almost, as a political scientist, I'm immediately tempted to say maybe it's a poly-revolution or a perma-revolution that we're experiencing both in the geopolitical and the technological and the military domain. Given your varied experience, how do you see that playing out in the defense and the intelligence sector specifically? And you can take your remarks anywhere you want because you have such a wide experience, and perhaps a little optimism is warranted.
Usually people who know me would not come to me for an optimistic view, but I will try. I mean, to start off, I think I'd say in terms of geopolitics, I mean, it is pretty unprecedented. I mean, you know, even traveling over here today or yesterday, 2 planes, turn my phone on to aeroplane mode. You know, when you then turn on your phone again, I mean, there is pretty, you know, fundamental change both domestically and international, and I think that is just a feature at the moment, and it's going to get worse. And I think I was going to make 3 points, but I think I'll start actually with consumption rates in terms of ammunition, which is very pertinent for this panel, but also in terms of the geopolitical environment, because theatres are becoming interlinked, I'd say dramatically. So while we're all here discussing European security, you cannot actually now sort of isolate European security and those challenges from what's currently happening in the Middle East and what may happen in the future to the Indo-Pacific. So I think first on consumption rates and going back to, you know, is fast forward fast enough, I'd say no. So the issue that we'd had since the end of the Cold War in systems, and I'll use my experience in the UK system, but I think it's replicated throughout NATO, you generally have a Lance Corporal who would check the ammunition held at a, say, company level. That would go up to unit level, it would go up to brigade, and it'd go all the way up to the head in terms of the board, and they'd look at the number and say, okay, well, this is what we have in terms of ammunition, and it would get ticked off and signed off. for years at a time because we didn't actually look at that number to say, is that enough for what may be required? Other analysts at RUSI at the time in 22 in the summer assessed that the British Army had about 6 weeks worth of 155 ammunition. It was reported in the media at the same time that the Bundeswehr maybe had up to 2 days. So in terms of what we had at the time, not enough. And then additionally, what we would generally use the higher end equipment was for training. So say 10% of X. So our industrial capacity was only 10% to get back up to that number, which was insufficient. So I think it's really important to try and understand what we are actually in the physical domain trying to get to, which brings me to enough. Is there that view collectively as an organization in terms of NATO is what the Russian intent is? We know that the Russian military and Putin has designs on Europe beyond Ukraine, but is that a full invasion? Is that armored columns going to Berlin, or is it a more limited operation within, most likely, the Baltic states? My own position is that Putin knows that he can't defeat NATO militarily, but he may be able to do it politically. So a likely operation is probably limited to try and stay not under the threshold of war, but under the threshold that NATO can't fully activate under Article 5. And I think it was Lord Robertson this morning who talked a little bit about hesitation, and there was a war game, understanding it's only one war game that was run German-led in December 25, and the after-action review said actually it was hesitation, that element within there. And then I'll bring it to the wider geopolitical element and just mention what's been happening not just the last week, because it started on Saturday within the Middle East, and the implications of consumption rates, which will have a direct impact in terms of support to Ukraine, but also in terms of Europeans. So using data, apologies for getting my phone out, from The Economist, looking at this. So the UAE faced 346 inbound threats, so some ballistic, some drones, on the assumption of 2 Patriot missiles per target. That'd be 692 missiles expended. The stockpile assessed is between 700 and 1,000 modern missiles. So therefore, one major barrage against the UAE consumes 70 to 100% of interceptors, which means rationing already, and we're not 1 week out. That has a massive implication for European security. And I've said this for quite a long time. We've depleted our stockpiles, our cupboards are bare. It's not just increasing that, it's going out and buying new cupboards and stocking them up, because this is all linked. And I suppose, there's again reports that President Trump has already had the CEOs of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin into the White House to say, well, you've got to increase the capacity. On some of these weapon systems, they can only produce at a stretch target 100 a year. So this is going to have real implications. And I think just finally, I have ex-military experience, but I also do a lot more on the political now, which is when we're discussing this, we always tend to stay in the physical component because it's measurable. But obviously, when we looked at what may or may not happen at the start of 22, we focused on the physical component, which was effectively that the Russians will invade Ukraine, that the Ukrainians don't stand a chance. We didn't look as much at the conceptual components, and we completely ignored the moral component. Now, the generals already covered the conceptual component, so I won't. But in terms of the moral components, I think it is absolutely the comparative advantage that NATO militaries have, bearing in mind it's not that difficult to have better leadership and a better ethical foundation than Russian forces. But it's not just about the military as well, it's where the political meets the military. And this is where I am most concerned. So already mentioned in terms, again, the general responding in terms of the military to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I know other countries had different experiences, but fairly recently in the UK there was a report which was the political response to that, and it was pretty chaotic, despite the fact that, yes, it was unprecedented, but there was always this view very early on that it was a fairly linear crisis because it would be a vaccination program that would get us out the other end. Bearing in mind there's a nuclear, hybrid and conventional dimension to what may come in Europe, it's going to be much, much worse. And I don't have the confidence at the moment in the political part. mainly due to capacity. So again, in number 10 today, while European security is the most important, Lord Robertson talked about this today, is it the most important thing today? Will it be the most important thing tomorrow? I'm not entirely sure. So in terms of making that political military link, and then finally, Europe is also changing. If you look at the electoral cycle within Europe and the sort of the potential outcomes, say the French presidential election in 27 is an easy example to make. Europe will look very different in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. And I think that's something that we also need to be mindful of in keeping this in terms of the unifying element, focusing on Russia again, which we heard in the last panel together.
You don't have to tell us twice in the Baltic that it's where the political meets the military is where the challenge is. So a quick question, a quick follow-up. So are the changes in approaches then warranted in terms of, for example, banning media, certain media, Russian media in the region, other policies that perhaps in peacetime would look as infringing on freedoms? Where do you draw that line when we have to combat that military plus political threat?
I think it's very difficult, and you'd see a difference in that in terms of sort of the geographic spread again of allies and partners. And I think it's where it's really important to keep those discussions at an alliance level. I was at NATO in shape in 2014. I think best and most illuminating job that I will ever have. And I thought it was all really good because prior to that, and when I did European Security University, you'd never get that full spread. Whereas at NATO, if you're like, well, what do the Estonians think? You don't sort of go, well, this is what the Estonians may think. You just go and see the national military representative and ask them. So I think that's what NATO, happens at NATO, and it happens on a daily basis. But that's got to continue, particularly on the European side, as there is a change in policy on the US side.
Thank you. And Ambassador Millman, I turn to you now. We just heard from Mr. Arnold that Russia and Putin wants to go beyond Ukraine. That's clear. But the question is, what does it really mean, right? So I'm really curious to hear your analysis. How do you see Russian invasion? Is an invasion of NATO territory likely in the near term, let's say? And how do you measure, how do you see European progress? So we have already heard two opinions that fast forward is not fast enough, but it's also, is there still progress? So what is your assessment?
Thank you. I am the observer from the Middle East. We have our own war, and now there are strikes on Iran. And there is also strikes of Iranian army on Azerbaijan, for example. We are now in a very critical and dramatic stage. Now, as observer from the Middle East, still, this is a good question. If the war in Iran now, when the United States and Israel now in a battlefield, and if the war in Ukraine is a part of the Grand One war between the Western democracies against the axis of evil. Russia, Iran, maybe North Korea, and other terroristic organizations like Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, etc., Houthis, etc., etc. This is one question, but it's not in our panel, but it's also we have to think if there is something that is interconnected. And the experience from these two wars, it's very important for Europe to understand that the threat of Russia will not disappear in the near future and the long-term future. Now, my central argument is very simple. Europe has accelerated, without doubt, but it has not yet fully adapted to the nature of the Russian challenge. And Moscow is not primarily preparing for a classic large-scale war with NATO. Not now. Instead, it has already conducted a multi-domain campaign designed to destabilize Europe below the threshold of Article 5. And this is the main and important point. Everything, but this is a threshold. Now, this is not improvisation of Kremlin. It's a continuity. Yes, it was, the first stage was in the post-Soviet area, in the beginning. It was in the beginning of 2000s with Putin. Then there was a second operational hybridization period between 2007 and 2014, for example, Estonia cyber attacks, the Georgia war, and of course the Crimea-Donbass model. And third, since 2022, what we are witnessing is systemic gray zone confrontation with Europe itself. And we are now firmly in this stage. Now, I will say that what concerns me most is the clear escalation since 2023 towards physical disruption inside Europe. And we have to take it very seriously. We see a pattern that aligns closely with known Russian tradecraft and the plots against defense industry figures, Rheinmetall, for example, CEO of Rheinmetall. It's cargo sabotage schemes, it's arrests of suspected operatives in Poland and the Baltics, and infrastructure probing all point in the same direction. Roughly 95% of identified perpetrators were ordinary civilians, typically financially motivated and often operating in small groups. And this points to a deliberate operational model, the use of disposable agent to generate deniable, scalable disruption across Europe while preserving strategic ambiguity. And this is not a random harassment. It is operational preparation in the gray zone. Of course, we also observe the special usage of UAVs. It's an important thing. It's a new stage in the military strategy. There was, and this interference across Northern Europe, for example. Of course, it's Baltic states, Poland, Germany, Finnair temporarily, it was in 2024, suspended flights to Tartu, for example, due to navigation disruption. Europe should assume this pattern will intensify in the short term. Now, the more plausible objective is the political disintegration of NATO through controlled escalation below the war threshold. Calibrated incidents, deniable sabotage, nuclear signaling, the pressure designed to exploit a light hesitation. And this is accent, my accent is on hesitation. Nothing in the current trajectory suggests strong risk aversion in the Kremlin. Now, has Europe used the war years effectively? This is the main and the most important question. And in my opinion, Europe has made real progress, but structural gaps remain. Defense industrial ramp-up is still uneven. Ammunition production remains constrained. Procurement is fragmented. Mobilization planning varies widely. Many European economies are not yet configured for sustainable high-intensity competition. Put bluntly, Europe remains partially in a peacetime mode, while Russia is already confronting in confrontation mode. And this is the very important difference. It's also, there's a psychological dimension, but it's very important for politicians, for military establishment, etc. I will say that we must also addresses a sensitive but necessary issue. It's a political will. And what we see in the context of the war in Ukraine, that in the United States today, we see signs of growing war fatigue, and we have to take it in consideration. Alongside bipartisan caution regarding the new overseas conflicts and an increasing strategic focus of American administration in the Middle East and in the Pacific area. So this does not mean, in my opinion, that the United States will abandon NATO. Of course not. But prudent European planning must assume scenarios in which the initial burden of response fall primarily on Europeans. Now I will go to some, maybe I will say that the issue in Europe is not capacity. The issue is speed, coordination, and strategic mindset. And in conclusion, I will say that Russia is already conducting hostile operation across Europe in the very gray zone. The real test of European defense, in my opinion, not only how fast Europe rearms, but how quickly Europe can detect, attribute, disrupt, and deter below the threshold of war. Europe does not need to panic, but it does need faster decision cycles, tighter coordination, and more proactive posture in the hybrid domain. So Russia is already operating in the gray zone. And the question for Europe is simple. Can Europe act faster than Moscow can probe? Thank you.
Thank you. And we have 3 opinions so far who say that fast forward is not fast enough. And I wonder where the 4th opinion will go. But before we move on to you, General, my follow-up question is, you took us into a deep dive of the sub-threshold gray zone activities. So I wonder, and we also mentioned some other actors that are supporting Russia. I call them the axis of evil. So I wonder, how do you see the level of coordination between these actors in the gray zone? And how much does Russia then coordinate? How much joint action is there in the operations that you mentioned?
First of all, we see, for example, Russia and Iran, for example, coordinated their intervention campaign, for example, in Europe. The same tools, the same strategy, in this special manipulation of the public opinion. We were witnesses of the special campaign in Germany, France, and Israel. The same pattern, the same logic, and the same strategy. There also is a coordination between Russia and China and Iran. This triangle. There is no military coordination in this stage, of course, but we know that there is a very, very effective exchange of intelligence between Russia and Iran. And now I will give you only one example, very small example. During the 12 days war, during the visit of Iranian foreign minister in Moscow in June, on the 10 days of this war, from Russian side in Kremlin, with Putin were 3 high bureaucrats. One of them was the head of what we call GRU, Russian military intelligence. That means that the cooperation is very, very, very close cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you for
this
that
is
response.
the real axis of evil. We have to understand that I am not exaggerated. We have to take into consideration. There's really axis.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I want to keep this conversation still in that hybrid domain realm, in that deep gray, as you said, I don't know, millennial gray threat domain. And I would love to give now the word to General Martin. Now, how do you see that? How should European defense stress these hybrid threats? How do we safeguard our credibility with this future threat in mind, with today's threat in mind and future's threat in mind? And I also I wonder, how do you characterize the effect of Russia's invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, on European defense mindset? Because that is something that you do in your work as well. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today as a newcomer. Even if I understood that if you are a newcomer, you will become a veteran maybe in the coming years. Okay, taking into account your question, what has already been said, I think it's important to always keep in mind the global view of the situation. And I think first we have to keep in mind that we are speaking about war, confrontation, something like clash or test, in my view, with Russia is possible. And we could, it has been said on the morning, not be prepared for it. As long as the war in Ukraine persists, the Russian armed forces are strategically constrained. Meanwhile, the Russian defense industry, operates at full capacity, and if there is something like peace, ceasefire or peace agreement in Ukraine, we understand that it will not take long for its forces to replenish their stockpiles. The Kremlin has drawn lessons from the ongoing conflict, and there are some dilemma, I think, for Russia, a double dilemma. First of all, Moscow will face returning to a state of peace, if it exists. The first immediate challenge will be managing the large number of soldiers who, given their remunerations, are effectively more mercenaries than soldiers. And the second medium-term dilemma lies in the challenge, indeed, the risk of restructuring national revenues by reducing the profitable share allocated to the defense sector. Taken together, these factors suggest that a return to peace maybe does not serve the Kremlin's interest, or maybe is a difficulty for the Kremlin. Under such circumstances, should Russia perceive a lack of collective European preparedness, it may discern, in my view, a window of opportunity for renewed confrontation. This would likely entail testing NATO's cohesion and credibility. For any failure in the alliance response could prove existential for the alliance. In this context, the French Chief of Defense, General Mandon, said we have to be prepared to a major test within the next 3-4 years. In geographically considering where such a confrontation might unfold, the Baltic states readily come to mind. Yet, and it is your question, in an area of cognitive warfare favoring hybrid forms of action, anything is possible, especially by nature the unimaginable. And it has been already said, actions in this field, in this particular field, already started. It is already ongoing. What we understand and what is key now, it has been said, Russian invasion of Ukraine has sent shockwaves that have completely upended the foundations of European defense. It became clear that Ukraine's territorial integrity is that of all of Europe. To defend Ukraine is to defend Europe. Ukraine security engages that of the entire European continent, what is something new. Second point, I would boldly argue that European defense has never been stronger, even if it is not yet enough. Just look at what has been done in support of Ukraine, 200 billion of euros. Just look of what is ongoing in Europe, all this new comprehensive approach, military, financial, and humanitarian. European nations, always acting in a sovereign and regalian manner, have succeeded in revitalizing key European defense instruments. I am thinking about EPF, SAFE, EDIP programs, and so on. They are all means of intensifying cooperation among member states and contributing to the strengthening and resilience of our European defense. Technological and industrial base, which is the ultimate key to an integrated autonomous defense architecture, capable of responding to any future conflict on European soil. I will just mention, but you have all these maneuvers, signaling maneuvers, especially in Baltic states, especially in Estonia. These maneuvers are very important to deter Russia. At the same time, and we had this discussion, of course, NATO's role as the main security guarantee in and for the Euro-Atlantic region is and it will remain crucial, with the US or even with a more limited US commitment and contribution. Its structures, interoperability, and C2 capabilities are major assets for Europe. And I would like just mention a report written by a French IFRI. It is French Institute of International Relations, supported by 9 European think tanks. This think tank concluded that 2 factors have deterred Moscow from engaging in another open military confrontation against the Euro-Atlantic community. First, NATO's cohesion, and second, Ukraine's continued resistance, which tears down most of Russia's military resources. But should either of these pillars erode, the risk of open armed confrontation between Russia and Europe would rise markedly. Okay, we said it is not fast enough, but what we have to do? Okay, we have to speak, we have to understand that we are facing a problem, but we have to do something very concrete. What I can say, at this stage, I think we have to keep in mind our history, the history of my generation. At this stage, we undeniably observe structural shortcomings after 30 years of limited investment in the defense sector. We need to rebuild capacities, shifting from a flow-based approach to a stock-based approach. Easy to say, more difficult to enforce. Until now, our European defense industry has been structured to ensure flows, oftentimes limited by the low number of orders. We have clearly been organizing slowness. What is thus required of us is a true revolution, no less. This implies better identifying the capability needs of each member state and, if possible, and when possible, aligning our strategic priorities. It is paramount for our own security that we achieve good NATO-EU complementarity, avoiding unnecessary duplication and aiming at building a robust European pillar within the alliance. Both efforts are complementary in the mutual interest of our country. I just would like to mention one additional point, just to say that it's key, because when we say it is not fast enough, what we have to do for that, just look at the example given by our Ukrainian friends, what they are doing. Clearly, we have to shift in terms of time it takes for conception and production of our assets, we have to shift from decades of years of or months to decades of weeks or day. And we have to keep in mind that we need equipments, but the cost of equipment is a key issue, because you can see that the cost of equipment in general is too expensive and is more expensive than in the past. And when you buy some equipment, you have to keep in mind the cost of maintenance. The cost of maintenance. It's the only solution, and it is key to ensure a sustainable model of forces.
Thank you. When you are talking about how do we solve this and what to do, do you feel that the psychology within the alliance has shifted? I'm talking to the debate around the response system, about how agility is kind of baked in the approach, and how the idea that sort of, in a sense, that comfortable peacetime mindset that Arkady referred to, my read is that that's changing somewhat. What is your perception from where you sit, General?
I have no doubt that our mindset change, no doubt. But just listening to our politicians, leaders, we understand that this shift has been made. But it takes time to go from the speeches, statements of our leaders to the reality of what is done by the industry, because industry has its own problems to organize, to finance, and so on. And I think that now it is a key moment between all this political knowledge of the situation and this political intent to put into the reality of the production of sufficient and relevant assets.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, before we go to the Q&A, and perhaps there's something that you want to react to what your colleagues have said, given this very strict order of talking, perhaps, something, so no particular order, please.
So
Full power to my panelists.
I might
Please,
start
General.
just by, it is in the nature of a soldier to say he never has enough, or she never has enough. That is the way that these things work. And of course, as a US Defense Secretary once said, you fight with the army you have rather than the army you like to have. And I think it is worth just reflecting on how far NATO has come over the last few years. We now have a strategy and we have a set of plans that tell me in detail what it is that I'm supposed to do. I was with the Estonian divisional commander yesterday, where we were talking about the detailed dispositions from the French and British forces that would support the Estonian division in the event of a crisis. That is not where we were 5 years ago. And I see a very different mentality across the alliance compared to that which we have seen in the past. And I've spoken a little bit about the level of innovation that I'm beginning to see now, that is learning from other people's experiences and transforming the way that we fight. So in many respects, as Ed described it earlier on, the sort of conceptual and to an extent the moral component is absolutely in the right place. I think we're getting much better in terms of our physical component, but I would stand by what I said earlier on, that there is more still to do. We don't own the timeline and we need to get on with it in the way that our other speakers have described already.
Mm-hmm. So, do we have anything to add? And of course, the looming question is it too late? And what I'm hearing from you is that it's not too late. So perhaps,
Hopefully.
General Martin, please. No? Okay. So in that case, we have a provocative question here from the audience. I'm going to read it as is, but don't kill the messenger. If the US shifts focus and Europe has to fight alone, which capability gap kills us first? Air and missile defense, deep strike, ISR, ammo, C2, something else? Ed, can I turn to you?
Oh, go on then. I think it's not just ISR in terms of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. I think it's intelligence. I think one of the big issues late sort of 21 was actually it was US, UK intelligence that was saying this is going to happen when there was sort of an umming and ahhing. I think it was the head of the French defense intelligence equivalent lost his job over in sort of mid 22, and actually it's the key difference between NATO and the EU in terms of intelligence capabilities. And one thing in terms of intelligence capabilities, especially for example human intelligence capabilities, you can't just buy it. It has to be developed and potentially over a very, very long time. And what we're talking about at the moment is if Russia is going to do an operation, what type of operation that is. That's based on intelligence. All military plans are based on intelligence. The NATO regional plans are based on intelligence, largely US intelligence. That said, even if the US were not likely or didn't want to get fully involved in a potential conflict, they can still provide the intelligence. And I think that would still happen.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a full informed audience here. So please raise your hands. And we have someone with a mic, I believe. Yeah. Yes, sir, please. And I have been instructed to be very strict. Questions, not statements, is the motto of the day. Please, sir.
Hi, my name's Steve Ellis. I'm with EF, Education First, and I just wanted to ask about the human systems that you have. We've talked about ammunition and intelligence and everything else. You're working in a fundamentally international context. Your battle groups contain multiple countries. How able are the people to communicate to one another and obviously learn to trust each other when they're under pressure? What's your experience at the moment?
So I'll start that as I'm a predominantly British corps, but with a multinational headquarters, and routinely exercise with the Czechs, the Italians, and the Canadians, and over time many others too. I think I've seen over the sort of 15 years or so, maybe a bit longer, that I've been involved with NATO organizations, various. I've seen a vast improvement in our ability to be able to communicate together, and some of that comes down to the standard of English, if I'm being honest, and that's as much a British problem as it is a non-native speaking problem, and that is getting, as I say, much better. I think also the sort of galvanizing effect of the threats that we've seen manifest over the last few years has really helped to sort of bind people together with a sort of sense of collective endeavor that has been very powerful. I think there is more to do still in terms of our ability to be able to move data seamlessly from around our multinational systems. The NATO adoption of the Viva network will be an important part in that process, and I think that will everything I've seen tells me that if we can do that to a high degree, then it allows us to fight in a very different way, as I talked about earlier on. So I think in that sense, there are some, of course, there's optimism. There's still some areas of development. I think in bringing those two things together, where we need to focus our training is really understanding the potential that data provides, and my soldiers need to be capable of understanding that potential, understanding where cloud computing might take us, pushing the boundaries in terms of where artificial intelligence and machine learning might take us, such that we're able to fight in a way that we would need to going forward.
Thank you. Yes, you have other...
Just taking the opportunity, the fact that human resources have been mentioned, I think it's a key factor, because we discussed about we need to buy new assets and so on, but assets without people recruited, educated, trained is nothing. And we are all in Europe facing the question of demography, and the reality of demography. It means it is a challenge for us, because the trend is not good at all, and we have to take into account the point. And we can see at the same time an evolution in Europe with the development of the conscript part of the armed forces. I think it's one evidence of this adaptation of the European countries to the reality of the threat we are facing.
Thank you, Arkady.
Yes, I would like to add one component that is out of our discussion, but it's very important from Israeli experience. They're really very important to understand from military establishment. There is the volume of the civic resilience, because there is a real coordination. If military establishment knows that on the battlefield he has the opportunity and the time to continue these operations, it gives to military establishment understanding that this establishment could achieve different goals. If there is no civic resilience, there is no chance. Because this is some kind of psychological dimension. And on the other hand, if you don't have shelters, for example, or if you don't have, for example, anti-missile systems, how you will manage all of this? It doesn't matter if you have 200 jets in the air. If people, the citizens, they have to feel secure. And there is a different kind of this resilience. And I'm not sure that today European mindset or mode is like we know what we have to do if suddenly there will be some accident. For example, I suppose that, and I know also that, for example, in Estonia, there is a different situation than it is, for example, in Germany or in France, because it's territory, it's distance is too long, yes? But this is a very important component also for the army. And this connection is very important.
Thank you. While we're taking more questions from the audience, there's a quick question, I think that's for you, General Macron. There have been, because you mentioned EU-NATO coordination, right? So I'm going to point this in your direction. What are the areas that need to be focused on in fostering EU-NATO cooperation?
You know, it is what I said about EU building instruments, financial instruments, to support this effort in the field of defense industry.
So the first step is from the EU side.
It is one action, concrete action, conducted by EU in supporting this need.
Thank you. Please. Yes, perhaps.
Eric Lawson, Belgian Joint Staff. Two of you have mentioned the increased need for ammunition and other consumables. Now, with regard to that, is it not time to defragment the European defense industry, like they did with Airbus in the field of civil aviation?
What I can say, theoretically, yes, but we know that practically it is not so easy. And it means that there is a need of, it has to be something done by countries at the political, at the leaders level, and it is not easy to do.
So, the only thing I'd add to that is that we talk about deterrence by denial. That's the basis on which the strategy that NATO has configured is or is based. We talk a little bit about deterrence by punishment. I think there's also something about deterrence by production, which I think sort of gets to your point. And everything that I've seen again from Ukraine and from Russia tells me that Russia takes note of our ability to produce equipment at the scale that it is producing it itself, and indeed Ukraine is doing the same. And therefore, the more that we can do to bolster our production facilities, the better chance we have of deterring aggression.
Thank you. Please. Yeah, be bold with your hands so that the assistants with the microphones can see you, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Juan Castillo, and I'm from the Canadian Embassy. And my question is a reflection of something that Ed Arnold and as well as General Macron mentioned, and it's in relation to consumption and this whole comprehensive approach. And it's actually like a good segue after the last question, and is how can we ensure that like there's the political will to develop capabilities. We know what we want, how we can ensure that like the industry can actually meet that demand. How can we ensure that the private sector is able to actually invest just after many years of neglecting pretty much that sector. Companies may not feel comfortable meeting the demand right now. So I'm just trying to think, again, from that comprehensive approach, how can we get industry going and meeting the requirements that we have? Thank you.
I mean, there are some positives. I think the difficulty is sort of scaling that, and in terms particularly on sort of defence industrial cooperation, which I agree with the general, it's all really sticky. And the difficulty now is, I mean, while it has been challenging to politically release more funds for defence, that's actually kind of largely been done. The pace at which that is happening and the adoption, I mean, you said in your question that we know what to spend on. We don't quite, so there's still a little bit of a question mark. But what really sort of annoys me when we're talking about all of these issues and we're talking about strengthening, etc., there's so much more we could do. I find it incredibly bizarre that NATO assesses that we may be at war with Russia in 2030, yet the target for spending 5% on GDP is 2035. And if your electoral cycle is aligned, roughly speaking, to that, for example, in the English system, we have a general election maybe in 29, possibly before. So there's actually no guarantee that a future government would sign up to it. But on other things, again, using the UK as an example, for example, net zero, that is a target that's built into law. We passed an act of parliament to say by 2050, we need to be net zero. But we don't do the same on a defence spending pledge, despite the fact that all of the political parties are now aligned. I don't know if you know much about politics in the UK, but the Liberal Democrats are calling for 3%. If the Liberal Democrats are calling for 3%, then you actually have a lot of political manoeuvre to move that way as well. So there's always things we could be doing more. And the General mentioned, I mean, what I always say to this as well, not just on defence industrial, but other aspects. The political declaration set in the strategic concept was defend every inch of NATO territory. Quoting the Secretary General last year when some drones came over the border and struck Poland, and the formation of Eastern Sentry was, we're going to make it stronger and more flexible. Well, why isn't it already the most flexible it could be? Why is it not the strongest? I know there's an element of escalation here, but there is so much more we can be doing. On the defence industrial side and the finance side, that is coming together. Defence Security Resilience Bank looks like it may start to be founded fairly soon. The investment that the organisations are doing, banks are starting to hire ex-generals, certainly Santander, about sort of effectively talking to banks and getting investment into the defence sector, which is notoriously a difficult industry to crack. But we do need to speed this up, and I think it is an element of political will and political pressure domestically on industry as well to sort out these disagreements that we always have between countries.
A quick follow-up. You're saying that it's a difficult industry to crack, but we are seeing a migration of startups in big numbers into the defense sector, looking for that applicability, feeling that there's momentum, there's funding there. Is that something that you're also seeing, or is that, again, not enough?
No, I mean, we are seeing it, and again, it is a process. There's a variety of companies out there, a lot starting within the US, where you got the initial investment from US venture capital that also have arms within the European market. And they are all also starting to be used in Ukraine, so getting that real operational data. I still think there is a bit of an assessment, though, to be had on the NATO side of what we're seeing in Ukraine. For example, the level of drone warfare, is that representative of the war that NATO may have to face? And also in terms of the variety of capabilities, the difficulty is if your tactical adaptation cycle in Ukraine is between 6 and 8 weeks, how do you stockpile drones for potential use in 2030? My answer to that is probably create these chassis of the drones, but not the software, and then put the software in at a later date. These are things that industry are all having to get away with. But if you buy a lot of these things and put them on the shelf now, they may be redundant when we need them.
I rather shamelessly snuck my own question in there, and I apologize for that. Now back to the audience.
Well, thank you very much. Artur Nagy Ujep from Czech Republic. My question would be connected for that to when I was in the Donbass like 3 weeks ago in Kramatorsk and making interviews with Ukrainian officers. There was a main point that it touched my view to when they're talking about their view about the European weapons, they glorify the quality, but I get like 1 point from them. They say that to maybe on the level or like between the level of quality and quantity, maybe Europe should move a little bit more to the quantity than quality. And I want to ask your opinion about this because this is a point that I regularly hear back from Ukrainian officers. Thank you.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think we may well be seeing some of that play out in the Middle East at the moment. The economics of firing a air-to-air missile which costs a lot of money at a relatively cheap drone doesn't really work out. So we have to learn from the Ukrainian experience and go for quantity as well as quality, one would hope. But there is to paraphrase Stalin, quantity has a quality all of its own, and we think we need to relearn that lesson, it seems to me, because we have become, certainly in my army, we have gone through a transition from being a threat-based army during the Cold War to being a capability-based army, in which case you don't need to worry too much about the quantity debate. As long as you've got the capability, then you can employ it in ways that kind of fit the operation. We're moving into a world where quantity really starts to matter, and we need to learn that lesson and learn it quickly. Just to build on the previous question, though, I think part of the answer to how we work better with industry is for people like me to have a very close relationship with our industrial partners, and recognizing that challenges competition rules and things like that. It seems to me that that the closer the warfighter and the industry are to each other, the better product we get. Something that perhaps speaks to the quantity versus quality debate as well.
Any other comments?
Yes, may I add additional vision from the Middle East? Don't afraid to buy Israeli weapon systems. Finland did it, Lithuania, Poland. You can cooperate without any doubt, and especially with the Israeli military experience. And then you can adjust it to Europe. And there's really big opportunities to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have another question here from the online audience, I believe, or someone from the room. Is it time for Europe to admit that current deterrence and defense postures are fundamentally insufficient? Which taboo strategic options should be discussed? Now, sir, you mentioned the different types of deterrence, including deterrence by production, was it? Yes. So which ones are the taboo, which taboo strategic options should we be discussing? Not necessarily launching, discussing.
I mean, that's a kind of fundamental NATO question. The alliance is, as you know, a defensive alliance bound together by respect for our territorial integrity, and therefore deterrence by denial is the cornerstone of every plan that's produced. And to move away from that, I think, would be a difficult thing for the alliance to do, recognizing that the country in which we're sat, and indeed Latvia and Lithuania and other countries that border Russia, feel very strongly about that. And if I were living in those countries, I would feel exactly the same way. So I think that we can't move away from that. Nevertheless, in the short term, where we don't necessarily have everything that we need, we might well need to combine deterrence by punishment as well as by denial, conscious that NATO has, I believe, an advantage in terms of our ability to be able to strike deep into Russia should it be required, and Russia shouldn't forget that.
Thank you. Any other opinions, perhaps from the room? Please, dear colleagues, and I will leave it to my colleagues with the microphones to make the decision.
Hello, my name is Rami from Israel. I have a question regarding the cultural change. In order for Europe to do faster, and that the faster will be enough, I think that culture change is the one that changing war. So where is Europe on the cultural change toward the capability to conduct those kind of changes in the military? And mostly to the general, the question.
That one.
Okay, thank you. You know, I think the example in front of us is what our Ukrainian friends are doing, and we are taking a lesson learned from them. And I think there is a link with industry, the question before. Supporting Ukraine is the best way for us to transform our doctrine, our industry, and so on, because they help us to transform these dimensions. Okay, I think it's a key points from our side. Of course, there is still this hesitation. Okay, next event, next war, next clash will not be exactly like we are observing the situation in Ukraine, and is along it's a defensive at the global level. It's a defensive layout and so on. But taking into account the number of drones produced by Russia, Shahid Geran drones and others, it's not very difficult to imagine that drones will be a key dimension of these forces, especially if it is not the field in which we are so strong, something like that.
Thank you.
I mean, two examples I'd highlight the significant cultural change that's happened in Europe is that the EU provides support to Ukraine from something that's called the European Peace Facility, that it was never meant to do. And the EU did that pretty quickly and increased its budget. Second, from a member state perspective, I'd use the example of Germany. So, you know, the initial Zeitenwende speech that Scholz gave was on a Sunday, which is very bizarre in German politics. It required changes to the constitution and the basic law. It was difficult, and it sort of started to run out of momentum, which I think the government now has actually brought forward. And back to my earlier point of the assessments, you know, Germany is saying their intelligence services has assessed 2027, so they're going to spend the money by 27. And what they're spending is eye-watering, including also discussions with both the UK and France about nuclear sharing within Europe. That is significant cultural change. I don't think it's as balanced across the alliance, but again, if the EU and Germany can change like that in a relatively small space of time, everyone else can.
So the only thing I'd add, Rami, is from a military perspective, knowing who you're going to fight and where you're going to fight imbues a very different culture to that which I have had for most of my military career, and that is being imbibed throughout the British Army, and I know many other armies too. And that is generating a cultural shift, certainly at the military level, that is really profound. I recognise there are other parts as you go up through this sort of strategic ladder that have made a similar sort of jump. It's not yet universal, which I think builds on the ambassador's points about civic resilience and the extent to which our populations are as well versed with the challenges as perhaps the uniformed elements within the room today.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Una. Charles May, UK military. As a military member, having a purpose is essential. I'm slightly confused, though, and it's easily done. The term Europe and European, in my mind, it can't be NATO, as our North American brothers and sisters are non-Europeans, although probably have great pride in European heritage. It can't be geography, as the European continent contains Western Russia and including Moscow, and it can't be the EU. As a British citizen, I was out of that almost 10 years ago. My question is, what does defending Europe actually mean to you? Thank you.
An excellent last question. Let's start with you.
What it means to defend Europe? What you said? there are borders, there are countries. Of course, we are speaking about NATO, we are speaking about EU+. I think the vision is continental Europe. I think, yes, I don't see any doubt or difficulty on our side on this particular topic. If I well understood your question, I am not 100% sure.
Thank you. Ambassador, are you comfortable with an outsider's view looking in on what does defending Europe mean? What should it mean? Given the ambiguity of the concept, I believe that was the premise.
If I understand the question, yes, it's. I think that there's a big difference between different parts in European countries, and if we are going to the threat, the Russian threat, still exists, and the feeling of European countries on the front line, what I call from Finland, Poland, Baltic states, Romania, not Hungary and Slovakia because of differences of political approach to the Russian threat. And for example, the understanding of this threat in Portugal or Spain, it's a different issue. And as observer from outside, I see differences in approaches and differences in understanding of the Russian threat. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, as observer, from outsider, it's a very difficult question to answer.
But in a sense, it's the other that defines us. So gentlemen, please, one of you, or both of you, but very shortly.
So I think it's not just Europe, it's North America. It's kind of what NATO's there for, and we shouldn't forget that. But the thing that motivates me, the thing that gives me purpose, is watching children of whatever country it is go to school every day and enjoy a rich and fruitful life thereafter. That's what binds me to this purpose, and I suspect binds many of us in uniform to the same thing.
Yeah, I don't actually think it matters too much, because if we're worried about that distinction, we've already hesitated and potentially lose. I think we'll know an attack when we see it and we will respond. And for that, I think it is NATO. And what the current Secretary General says, I think really well, is there's no East, there's no West, there's only NATO. I think that sums it up pretty well.
Thank you. Fast forward is not fast enough. Stockpile depletion, including for cost reasons, but not just, for availability reasons. Under the threshold probing, cognitive warfare, political vulnerabilities, optimistic military spending timelines, let's say, and a peacetime mindset, it was what we're dealing with. But the culture has changed. Societal resilience is becoming prioritized. And if we start today, there is something to be said for deterrence by production. We now know whom and when we're going to fight. And to finish with Ed's words, there is so much more we can be doing.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for our panelists and our moderator. Brilliantly done. Just a quick announcements. We'll have another coffee break. Please return back to the hall at 3:40 in advance of panel 3. And just a reminder, if you would like to take a tour of the Baltic Defense College, you can sign up downstairs at the welcome desk. There's a QR code where you can scan that, and they'll be walking up the hill at 5:15. Enjoy your coffee.